what I'm going to do is ask each of my panelists, I'll call on each of the panelists to introduce themselves and say a few words about themselves. Try to keep it to a minute or less, folks. Let's go ahead and start with you, Glenn Crouch, Engineering Director at American Express. Glenn?
Hi, Joanna. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I'm Glenn Crouch, working at American Express. My background has been in application development previously, so a lot of back-end and front-end development over the years. 2 years ago, I transitioned into our cloud team, so I now focus a lot more on infrastructure, but bringing my application hat to that space to help with the cloud solutioning. Excited to be here, and definitely one of the trends I see that I'm excited to talk about is the infrastructure and application convergence. And how both are starting to overlap a lot more to enable developers to be successful and innovate. So with that, I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. And for just a reminder for folks, if you have questions, please post them throughout the panel session. I will keep an eye on the questions and ask them. I'm sure some of you already have questions for Glenn based on this notion of application and infrastructure convergence. Eric Kedrowski, let's go with you. Eric is Director of Cloud Security Research at Sunrise Security.
Hey, John, nice to meet you. I'm Eric Kedrowski. It's great to be here today. I've been doing security for almost all of my career and led IT and security teams. I'm just super excited to be here with this awesome panel to talk about the topics today and looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And Kevin Lash, Director, Global Financial Services Strategy and Solutions at Nutanix. Nutanix. I always say it wrong, man. I'm thinking of Nutella. It's a terrible company name for that reason.
That's the only reason.
Nutanix.
So that we can actually get the name right. But
Nutanix.
But now no one will forget Nutanix. But you may forget me. So let me introduce myself. So I'm Kevin Lash. I lead the financial services industry and solutions at here at Nutanix. I've been in the industry my entire career. So I started out with app dev and led app dev groups for Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Fidelity Investments, and then sort of moved over to the dark side of enterprise tech with Microsoft, Red Hat, and I've been here at Nutanix for 3 years.
And just a reminder, Kevin is at a company called Nutanix. And next up is Zach Murad, who's the Chief Information Officer at CRISIL, a Standard & Poor's global company. Zach?
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, so I'm the Chief Information and Technology Officer at CRISIL, and I've been spending a lot of time at S&P Global. It's one of our companies. Similar to Glenn, I've been spending a lot of time across both infrastructure and applications. I spent a lot of time within infrastructure running engineering and operations in cloud, and then took up a lot of application development. And just like Glenn, I see a lot of convergence happening and folks crossing over, a lot of time being spent on agile transformation, how to enable a whole lot of agility within the organization to start to deliver much, much faster. So a lot of good stuff. Great time to be in technology. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it really is, Zach. You're absolutely right. And last but far from least, Ravi Trivedi, who is the Assistant VP for Innovation and Decision Sciences, by the way, best job title ever, at Nuveen. Ravi?
Thanks, Joanna. So I lead data science at Nuveen. I'm responsible for the development of our data science platform, as well as some of the projects around the marketing analytics area. I also help develop Innovation Center of Excellence at Nuveen, and in the past I worked for TIAA, AT&T, has a few other companies to build application development and data science solutions. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Thank you, Ravi, and I'm delighted to be here as well. And for those who joined late, I'm Joanna Johnson. I'm the CEO of Nemertes Research and also the Content Committee Chair for the WSTA. So now let's jump in and ask questions. I just want to remind everyone that I will be monitoring the Q&A, so please pose your questions. I will see that they get answered. I'm going to start with Glenn, but I promise I will open this up to absolutely everybody. Glenn, how does Amex keep pace and deliver innovation and new applications? What are the processes you put in place? What are the culture changes? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, great question. And I think, like you said, it's both about technology as well as the people and the culture in the company. So from technology side, something we continue to look at is how we move away from manual towards more automation. So looking at both the infrastructure and app side, how do we bring those things together, but use automation and engineering to actually speed up the process? So if you're moving from, say, an old stack to a new stack, or thinking about new technology platforms, how can we help our engineers to move faster with tooling and automation? So that's one area that we're investing in a lot more recently, I would say. And then also from the culture perspective, a lot of work's gone in with our teams to build internal and external technology culture, right? So when I say that, how we enable teams to do training, build our engineers' skill sets, and look towards the future from an innovation perspective there. We have some internal practices, things like universities and webinars that we do very regularly across the cloud team and across the technology teams to bring kind of insights and also help people learn and progress their careers without having to kind of do that in their spare time. We also have things such as guilds and even mentoring programs. So that really helps people to grow and kind of connect to different folks across the organization and learn what's going on outside their area. So I think that's one of the key call outs for us is changing the culture and how we're supporting to drive that from the ground up with some of these universities and other practices. And we see a lot of uptake and interest in that. People really kind of coming to these sessions, asking good questions, but then also we capture all that content and make it available afterwards. Very much like you would see any on-demand type learning and information across the company there. So a few call outs from what we're doing.
Glenn, before I open it up to other folks, who is invited? Who is this open to, and what percentage of the invitees actually participate on a semi-regular basis? I mean, is this open to every single Amex employee, a subset? Like, how do you structure
great
that?
question. We have thousands of engineers, obviously, across our teams. Mm-hmm. So many of these sessions are open to that entire population. So I think we have varying events, right, depending on the time zones and the content. We may open up some of the invites to our global infrastructure teams. And then we also open many of them, like I said, to the whole of technologies and even our product partners. So I think the audience is very broad. Normally, we're talking of hundreds or thousands of folks joining some of these sessions, and then you add on the replay and people using them, in their own time. It increases there, Jonna. So very broad. And then I think the uptake, as you asked, is pretty strong in the sense that we see a good percentage of folks attending, depending on their interests as well. So the goal is to open it up beyond just the people that practice these technologies so that we get different perspectives and also help people educate themselves, right, and see where they might have interests outside of what they do every day in their engineering roles.
Okay. Interesting. So thousands of folks have potentially the ability to zero in. Ravi, what about you? I know this was an area that you focused on a lot, building the processes for driving innovation. Any thoughts on how what those processes are and what the cultural changes are and what you've done in your various careers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the engineering processes should be flexible and easy for everyone to get onto, right? So like in terms of innovation, everybody should be able to share their ideas and innovate, and then there should be a team guiding them, right? So in terms of the process, in my past roles, I've seen where companies implement like a quick evaluation and a POC without going through any kind of architectures or standards to see whether the idea works out or it's a fast fail. And then once they figure out whether it's a good technology, then they take it to the architecture and go through pilots and productions and things like that. So that way you're able to implement lots of ideas and then fail fast rather than waiting to go through a process and then eventually finding out that that technology is no longer the emerging technology.
Ravi, it's interesting. You brought up this notion of there's got to be the people that actually do the innovation, which is everybody, and then the team guiding the innovation. And I started thinking to myself, I wonder, are they more project managers or subject matter experts or a mix of both? And I mean the guiding team. It would seem that in a sense, you really just want to coach people through the process. You don't necessarily have to be a subject matter expert on innovation, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Well, in my experience, I've seen those team members to be very technical. So they would know how to get a server, how to install things, enable SSL, as well as some kind of understanding around open source. Because if you see, completely the whole data science is open source. And a lot of libraries have to go through security scanning and things like that. So having the technical background would help out. Even the non-technical people enable their ideas.
Got it. And that's actually an interesting point. So it's the people that they don't just guide sort of project management wise, they actually help to set up and get things up and running and configured.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know in several of the large companies that I've worked with, there's sort of a process where we think of it kind of as a funnel where it's really wide on one end. Everybody can submit an idea. A large percentage of those ideas make it to the next testing phase, and then eventually they sort of make it through the process. And one of the things we try to do is recognize all participants for making it to any stage. So even if your idea only gets chosen at the very wide phase where a lot of them get chosen, still the recognition is that you've taken a proactive action in enabling innovation in your organization, which kind of leads to the gamification and the notion of badging. And Zach, I know in the pre-calls you had some thoughts there. Do you have any thoughts about how badging
Oh
and
yeah,
gamification can help? Okay.
absolutely. And I think, going back to some of the ideas that Glenn had, culture will eat strategy any day. I mean, that's something that I feel very, very strongly about. It is about the people. It is about tapping into their innate motivation and giving them the freedom scale to be able to execute, right? So if you're yearning for mastery of your trade and you have a purpose, right? And you have the freedom scale to be able to execute, then you're going to have a culture where a lot of innovation will start to happen and people are going to be motivated to do it. So as leaders and as engineers, one of the things that we can do is give them some on-ramps where we make it extremely easy and the cost for them to do development goes down, really, which is where we start to talk about agile. And the end prize is something from a gamification perspective, can be something like badges. So within S&P Global Ratings, we have a culture where we have put in a lot of badges. For example, if you have an application and you're going to get it certified, then you're going to get a badge for that, which is a DevOps or CI/CD certification. Same thing around innovation, same thing around stability, same thing around how you're going to do your code and development, right? So you start to gamify it. Even within the SRE community, right? If you're going to be looking to stabilize your application, make sure the things that a lot of times we don't talk about, which are the number of defects or incidents, and getting them under control. Well, if you have a very stable application with high quality, you deserve to get a badge. And as a Scrum team, you can be very, very proud of that badge because that shows your workmanship and the craftsmanship and the dedication that goes in building great products. So it really does go into the culture of the organization, and how do you take that culture and continue to hone in so that you can have a lot of teams working in parallel. And the only way they can work in parallel is if they have independence. They're able to develop products end to end without having to depend on other teams, right? So there's a lot there to unpack, and I think we'll talk about that convergence of application infrastructure, because that's really where that starts to happen.
I'm going to ask about that in a second, but early on you said if you have yearning for mastery of your trade and then two other factors, that's what helps the culture. What were those two other factors again? I didn't want to interrupt you to get them, but
Sure, absolutely. I think, if you have a sense of purpose, right, which is, and a purpose can be defined many other ways. It can be done through gamification. It can be done through vision for the organization. It could be through some goals that you've set. And then those could be around, come up with an idea and take it forward, right? So I think a sense of purpose really helps the organization. Then the freedom scale, which is really, I'm going to develop it the way that I think makes sense, which is where some of the innovative ideas come in. It may not necessarily even be from technology, but I have a great idea, and am I able to develop it and take it forward? Right. So, and then the mastery really comes in where I'm going to take the time to understand and really get into the detail. And for example, as AI ML is something that we're spending a lot of time on, a lot of engineers are spending their time on it. There are many levels of mastery you can achieve within AI ML, right? And the more you do, the more independence you have, the more time you're going to take. You're going to take your personal time to achieve mastery and build something that is of great quality. So if you throw a challenge and you have a gamification, then you have an organization of thousands of engineers that's essentially going nuts trying to achieve some of those prizes. And those prizes are essentially validation. It's not necessarily a monetary prize. That's not what's guiding you. It's really the self-motivation and self-satisfaction. Yes, I did it. And then being able to be recognized by your peers, and then wear that badge with honor.
Zach, I love this, and I'm just going to repeat what you told me for folks who are trying to boil this up. It's yearning for mastery of a trade, a sense of purpose, and the freedom to see your idea through all the way to the end. But coming back to that mastery and validation, it reminds me why I got into engineering in the first place. Just a very quick anecdote. When I started my college career, I went to Johns Hopkins for various reasons, and my mother hoped that I would become a doctor. So I started as a biomedical engineer because that seemed like a good on-ramp to med school. And then I realized that I really enjoyed the engineering side of this because essentially what motivated the engineers was making something work. And that to me was very powerful and very primal, and that touched a part of me that I've kept alive all these years. So when you talked about it, that really resonated.
Absolutely.
And my mother's 92, and she still wishes I'd become a doctor, by the way. Just for the record. Sorry, Mother. So we do have a question. I want to ask this before I open up to the rest of you. Financial services firms can have lots of toll gates between the top and the bottom of the funnel. How do you limit these to get to a real proof of concept, which is going to take resources and time and effort? How do you guys put in those toll gates and those limits so that you can get to a real POC? Anyone want to take that?
I can take it. I think, when you start to open up from an innovation perspective, you're right. You can have ideas that have almost, are not going to be in line with where the organization is looking to go, right? If you're looking at it from either from a social conscious perspective, products are going to go down that path, or you're going to look at, environmental sustainability, for example, products that are going to be commercially viable that you're trying to get into, or internally, they're going to help you from a bottom line perspective, like you said. So there are a couple of ways to look at it. One way is to say, I want to do inline innovation, which means let me take a look at my existing portfolio and guide the teams to say, the things that we're going to really be looking at are inline innovation, which is ideas that are going to be more in line with where we are, because that's where the organization is today. If you fast track further on, and if you're willing to take a lot more open risks, then you, of course, and you could be in an organization where you are opening it up. But these are essentially guidance that you're providing. This is the intent that you're providing to your engineers, that this is what our intention is, and then allow the engineers to start to go based on that intent.
So that inline innovation reminds me of something another participant in a similar panel at the WSTA said a little while back. Basically what they did was open up all innovation. If you could connect it to improving customer experience, they wanted to hear from you. If you could not make that connection, exactly, then not. I would also add, by the way, that there's sort of an investment component as you go along. You could say, look, you go from just a simple idea on a whiteboard to building a presentation showing you've thought about a bunch of things, to doing a very preliminary proof of concept with, very minimal funding, to building a bigger proof of concept. And as you go through, you flesh out the idea and spell out the anticipated ROI in greater and greater depth, which is another way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Anyone else want to add? I know poor Eric and Kevin have been sitting here very quietly waiting to be called on. So, Eric, is there anything you want to jump in on any of these culture events or the pipeline or anything else?
Well, I think when you look at culture, I think we have to consider culture from end to end, right? A lot of times in technology, we think of the technology piece, but there's a lot of pieces that are ancillary to that and support that. And so I think that when you're doing open innovation, like we're talking about, a big funnel at the top and limiting the toll gates on the way down, making sure you're incorporating the other teams that are part of that into that process. So if you're revolutionizing or making it modern, don't forget about the other teams that are doing that, so that you don't hit these walls or these roadblocks, that they're part of the process from the start, so that when you get down in the funnel and you want to make quick decisions, it doesn't become a drag. Because those teams don't want to be a drag either. They have the same purpose, they have the same motivation. And in what I find in a lot of the operations and security spaces, they also want to be as understood as the rest of the teams. Yes, there's other teams that sort of stand out, that make that great UI or make that great product or develop that great code, but there's other teams that are supporting it that want it to see it just as successful. And where I think it breaks down is when a lot of those teams sort of get left out of that, not modernized along with it. And then it's sort of like, well, why is this breaking? And it's more of the holistic than the specific. So it's something that I've always tried to be conscious of within my organizations and teams.
And Eric, what about the case, and I've seen this firsthand, what about the case where innovation threatens an entirely different team? And I'll give you an example. Just last week, I was talking to a client who developed a very streamlined time tracking application that meant that all the people that were involved in the previous time tracking application were going to become obsoleted. So the first thing they did was throw a ton of process at him and say, oh, before you can take this to proof of concept, you have to fill out all this paperwork, which hopefully will kill your innovation and you'll go away and won't do anything. How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, this is something that I've seen a lot in my career, and I break it down into three groups, right? You're going to have that one group that's just going to get it and say, you know what, I'm on board with this and I'm just going to ride it and see what happens. And on the other end of the curve, you have the people that are going to basically dig in and do what you just said. And I find there's a great majority of people in the middle that, they're not sure to some degree. They're a bit concerned to some degree. And it becomes an education thing, like things are going to proceed, things are going to change. And, that's what I tell all of my organizations and anybody that I work with, is things are going to change. And it's helping people find their spot post change. But you do that by involving them in the change, right? So your time tracking application, if a team went off and developed something completely new without even working with the team that's doing the current role, of course you're going to feel threatened. But if you say, hey, we're trying to build this awesome thing, you guys and girls and ladies and people are the experts, why don't you help us with this? They're part of that discovery, they're part of that innovation. And as the innovation goes along, you're going to find spots where those people are going to be. Sometimes there will be a place where, okay, listen, there's no fit and that's that, but you just have to be open with people that that's also part of the way that things work these days. And I think that when you do that, you'll find that that group in the middle will start to shift, as I say, towards the left and be more on board with it. And, and at the other side, you can't make everybody happy, and it's just that.
Well, and I think one thing that does help is having a broader organization that says, to the best of our abilities, we will find a spot for you, wherever. So if it's not, you may not have a spot in this space post change, but we have a commitment to our employees that we will try to find a spot for you, as opposed to, oops, you're obsolete, bye. That does help. Kevin, what about you? I'm sure you have thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Even the conversation you opened up with on the conference today. So first of all, just from an innovation perspective, I mean, innovation comes in a lot of different forms. I think the first thing I think about is, UBS Evidence Lab. They produced a report on IT spend, and they looked at it from security, compliance, core system modernization, innovation, and IT maintenance. And I think so. Number one, when they looked at institutions that are above 100 billion and those below 100 billion, there was a definite divergence in their ability to respond to this issue around innovation. So number one, institutions with 100 billion and above, they spend less on IT maintenance and they shift that to innovation and they make that investment there. And so institutions that are below 100 billion, and we have WSTA membership on both of those sides of that equation, they're spending, they're spending too much on IT maintenance, and that's inhibiting innovation. So they can't free up their best resources to focus on innovation. So number one, we've got to address the cost equation relative to IT spend and then innovation. We need to modernize our infrastructure to solve the cost equation. At the same time, we leverage our infrastructure to innovate. And I think two organizations that have really done a great job with that are Amex. Interesting enough, we have Amex and S&P, and both have been very, very vocal in the industry press So Swami at S&P has been very focused on, hey, we're trying to attract really great developers, people who want to use the newest tools. They don't want to be slowed down by infrastructure. We've got to, in order for us to attract them, we've got to give them the tools they're used to using. And those are both infrastructure relative to things like provisioning and DevOps and DevSecOps, and not slowing them down. And then, Evan at American Express has been really, really vocal about hybrid cloud and hybrid cloud services and using containerization, but then moving that workload between private and public cloud based on the needs of that organization. So, that's what I call innovation. Two really strong leaders like Swami and Evan driving their innovation as infrastructure, innovation as tooling to support their organization and their ability to respond. And really, who are they responding to? Number one, they're responding to PayPal, who's now got a market cap bigger than Goldman Sachs. And they're responding to organizations, and small organizations are trying to respond to organizations like Vero Bank, who just got a bank charter. And that's what they're trying to respond to. So it's cost and speed and infrastructure as an enabler, not an inhibitor.
And Kevin, this is all fantastic. Let me just went on one thing before we lose it, and then Zach, I'll go right back to you. As you started naming companies, I immediately thought of one of the best innovators in the business, Amazon. And I have to tell a quick story about this. Back in the day, just before Amazon, or when Amazon introduced the Kindle, I got the 1.0 version of the Kindle. And I called up a friend who had recently started a hedge fund. And I said, I won't use the guy's name because it's noticeable, but I said, friend, yeah, I never give investment advice, but I'm giving you some investment advice. Long on Amazon. And he goes, oh, Jonna, you don't get it. You're an idiot. Amazon basically isn't even turning a profit. Why are we going to want to go long on them? And I said, because they're not turning a profit because they're plowing every dime into R&D. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to turn a profit. He's choosing not to turn a profit, and he's investing heavily in R&D. And when I went back and looked at what he would have made if he had gone long on Amazon when the first Kindle came out, I just have to laugh. So yes, to that idea of, yes, you should spend money to innovate because that's what it takes, and build it into your business model. And if Wall Street doesn't like it, oopsie. And I know we're talking to the Wall Street Technology Association, but I think we're all grown-ups here and we realize this. So Zach, that's my injected anecdote. Back over to you.
Thank you, and I just wanted to say, amp up what you said, Kevin, and Swami is a great leader and a great friend. And innovation is something that you have to build in as part of your culture. And as we start to look at things like DevOps, that only help accelerate that culture because it lowers the cost for any engineer to be able to go into the environment and then be able to do things. The second piece of it, I think, is if you really feel that this is a people's first culture, and that you're going to invest in your people first and foremost, and there is trust that is actually being built in the organization that this is a people first and you're going to invest, then as you start to go through change management, where potentially you're going to be automating a lot of people, a lot of processes, then the people you will find will actually fully come on board because they see that as a vehicle for them to move up the value chain. And because you are actually taking the time to invest in them, we've done quite a lot of change within S&P. Within ratings, we moved 100% of our applications to the cloud, and we did that in about 8 months. And one of the conscious decisions we made very early on was that we're going to invest in our people. So folks that, for example, that are doing structure, they're the ones that retooled themselves, learned, and then actually moved everything to the cloud, and they became cloud engineers and found places. And, we really didn't let go of anybody as part of it. In fact, what we ended up with is a very strong set of engineers because they knew the environment before, they knew the environment afterwards, and they're part of that change and fully converted over. And that's something that you look back and you can be proud of, right? Because now you've essentially built a really solid set of engineers that are now looking forward.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I jotted that down. I'd like to turn back to Glenn because you've been sitting quietly there, Glenn, after you sort of dropped the bomb about applications and infrastructure convergence. And yet I know it's something everybody wants to talk about. So why don't you sketch out your vision for us? What do you mean by application and infrastructure convergence? What does infrastructure as code really mean, and how do you deal with it?
Sure. And some of this goes to what Zach and the guys were just saying about educating the engineers to do these things in a very different way, right? But I think what I meant when I first said that was in the past, you would very much have a very defined line between applications and infrastructure, and probably one group would not know much about the other. But now if you look at things like Kubernetes and other technologies, right, in the cloud, for example, often application engineers are getting very familiar and leveraging those tools to their advantage rather than them being something that the infrastructure guys worry about. So I think the convergence there for me is it's helping power the app teams to move much faster. If I can reproduce, run infrastructure on my local machine or spin up a new instance of my infrastructure because it's defined as code and not defined as, say, an operations engineer spending a week to do it, I can be much faster at doing my POCs or at deploying my code into a new environment and validating those things than before, where I have handoffs or I have to raise tickets and ask somebody else to do the work for me to create an environment, for example. So that's one area where I would say there's a big convergence, Jonna. If you look at the past to now and being able to actually, manage my own infrastructure as well. If I define it as code, then I can also make changes there, right, or propose changes as an engineer that I need to make me successful for a new POC or a new stack that I need to deploy on the enterprise infrastructure.
So, Glenn, I'm going to push a little bit back on that. Our final presenter was from Telstra, and he talked a lot about things you want in a telecom partner. And one thing was very low latency. The next one was connection to exchanges, and the third one was ownership of cable, which is highly physical and doesn't really lend itself well to being treated as code. Are there some aspects of infrastructure that simply can't be codified, or will they be codified? And if so, what do we have to wait for until that happens? And I'm thinking really about physical networks, fiber, things like that.
That's a good question. Certainly physical cable is not my expertise, but I would say we do see a big shift, Jonna. If you look at some of the innovation happening with, say, tooling out there for, say, software-defined data centers and networks, much of what we used to do in a hardware and very fixed manner is now done with software, right? Do you think about firewalls or, as I said, actual network interfaces and things like that? Everything used to be, I need to go buy hardware and physically provision that in my data center. Now you can spend those resources in seconds, right, or minutes. So I think that shift can continue. Definitely, telecoms, I would not be able to predict where that can go, but I think the concepts can potentially expand, broadly into those areas, and maybe there is a limit, physically at some point as to how far that can go. Would be my take on it.
Okay, and I want to come back to this whole issue in just a second, so I'm not leaving it. But I do want to take a little side note because we got a question that came in, and I believe it's really for Eric, since he is our security person. With convergence comes efficiency and agility, but also introduces risk and security concerns. Eric, why don't you tell us how we address this, and then I'll open it up to anyone else before we go back to the bigger convergence question.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the speed that gets generated, and that's a great thing. That's a proponent of why I am all on board with this and all on board with things like the cloud. But risks do get introduced, right? And sometimes we lose sight of the risk, or we get so excited by the value we tend not to look at or tend not to see it. And in some cases, it's new paradigms of risk that didn't exist in our traditional world. So I think what we need to continue to do is we're talking about this collaboration, this culture change. It's about including those teams, especially the security teams, early on in the process, and allowing them to understand what's going on, understand the drivers, and not just the technical but the business, and then help to understand the risks so that the true value of what you're trying to do gets seen and the true risks get uncovered. Because if you uncover them quickly and early, they're usually not very costly, whether from a dollar value or from an overhead or even a headache or finding yourselves on the front page of the news value. So it's just a thing I think we need to continue to shift the paradigm as we talk about what we're doing going forwards. And it's just understanding too is like from the flip side, it's like the security organizations need to understand the context of the business more. You know, a lot of the times, and I think Glenn mentioned it, and I've heard it a few times, this divide that we get between teams. And those walls are getting knocked down by these new paradigms, but we need to continue to expand them, like I said earlier, into these other teams so that everybody gets a better context of what everybody else is trying to do. They may not be experts in the area, but they can all sort of collaborate together to make better decisions, whether it be technology, whether it be user, whether it be security, whether it be operations.
Okay, so I have two. Sure, go ahead.
I wouldn't mind commenting on that too, because I think that this is the elephant in the room, right? It is the concept of cloud first strategy has been defined as public cloud now, and it is now the reason why cloud first strategy is being defined as hybrid cloud. And I think when we look at this industry and we look at the institutional decisions that have to be made as to what you can and can't do, and especially relative to how you utilize cloud environments, this is really one of the huge decisions. So I think Capital One has driven, their breach with AWS has brought a lot of political risk into this, with the the Senate now looking at this, and then the regulators looking at public cloud companies maybe as really needing to be designated as systematically important financial market utilities and regulated. Right now, all the liability for a data breach, even a server-side attack like with Capital One, never mind a patching issue like Equifax, really is the institution is carrying the liability. It's the one that has to apologize. It's the one that shows up in USA Today. And so this really has become quite a bit of an issue. And I think as public cloud companies look to try to deliver more utility to the financial services industry in terms of competing with things like Swift, now we really need to think about the stickiness there, right? Now it's not a matter of moving the workload based on where the regulator wants you to run it. Now you're sticky to that cloud environment. So it is a really big issue around infrastructure, and that's really why cloud first strategy is now being defined as hybrid cloud, and I liked one of your speakers earlier, I think used the term poly cloud or poly something for that reason. But it's a really, really massive discussion unto itself.
So yeah, let me hold that thought before anyone else answers, because I know Eric, the question was, how do you address risk and security concerns? And Eric's answers were engage the security team early and identify the risks accurately. Kevin, how would you boil up what you said into maybe a third bullet?
Yeah, I think don't ignore hybrid cloud. Don't define cloud first strategy as public cloud. And when you're saying you're moving into the cloud, that's how many workloads can I move as fast as possible to public cloud, because that's going to give me speed and agility and lower my costs. I think the issue there is, go in eyes wide open, have a hybrid cloud strategy, make sure you've established a private cloud control plane, so that if you find yourself in a situation like Capital One, you can move those workloads back and take control of that environment.
Okay, so Anonymous, who asked the question, we have 3 good answers. Engage security team early, identify risks accurately, and consider hybrid cloud versus pure public cloud, precisely to address some of the concerns like the Capital One AWS. Anyone else want to add anything to that before we go back to convergence of apps and infrastructure?
Yeah, I can add something.
So
go for it, Glenn. I'll let Glenn and then Zach.
Okay, we'll both keep something. I just wanted to kind of expand on what Eric said, which I think is about making cloud security part of your engineering practice and as partners instead of like the gatekeepers or the police, right? If you see the traditional mentality of detecting things after you've launched or after you have a breach, how do we go very differently now? Like from our experience, we have the cloud security experts working with our infrastructure teams and building and using kind of zero touch, zero trust practices from the start, instead of just discovering gaps after the fact. So I think that would be my biggest answer here, is thinking about shifting and really enabling it from the beginning of your process instead of afterwards.
Okay, and I've got that identified as a 4th item, which is make cloud security part of your development practice. Zach?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Really
sure
is shifting
left.
No, it really is shifting left. So the way that I would kind of couch it is, QA practices. We all know from DevOps that QA is really part of, how you develop. You may do pair coding, or you may do, shift left, and you may do, test-driven development. Some of those practices, those all came in because you're shifting left. In fact, DevSecOps is something that we talk about now rather than pure DevOps, right? Because security is inbuilt as part of your pipeline. You will have scans that are inbuilt in your pipeline that scan your code as you're shifting your code out. It's all built in as part of it. So, there's a little bit of a control plane on the periphery outside of the developer. But if all of your code for infrastructure is there for you to be able to look at and scan, then you have a much, much better controlled environment versus, in the traditional sense, you may have had servers where you did not understand the configurations associated with them. That really opens up a lot of holes. Whereas as we automate all of these ideas in on the cloud, then the security actually becomes much, much better. But of course, you have to have good scanning software. It really needs to be built in how you code and push code out.
So this is great, but I'm going to push back very, very briefly. Part of the reason we have silos in the first place, part of the reason that there's dev and there is ops and the two were separated, and part of the reason security is separated from infrastructure and applications, there's kind of two reasons. One is you want a fresh set of eyes on something. So if everybody's worried about security, then you have the problem, there's no separation of duties, and you can be authorizing your own code from a security perspective, which is a big no-no. That's one issue. But the bigger issue is human beings cannot possibly be equally informed and aware and contributing on every single dimension. So it's really unrealistic to ask me, Jana engineer, to be equally cognizant of applications, of infrastructure, of security, of development, of operations. At some point my head explodes and I turn to my boss and go, tell me what I don't have to worry about. And so you really do need silos that exclude the other conditions so that you can focus on doing what you do. How do you balance those two things, the whole de-siloization with the need to give people the ability to focus on, one thing and not 50 things?
Layers, right? So, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say that's exactly it. I think we replaced the term silo with a stack, right? Yes, not everybody can be equally informed on things, but if you're working in stacks, your stack, your DevSecOps, or whatever word we want to call this today, or whatever the buzzword is, you've got a stack of people doing these things, right? So yes, you're not expecting your low-level developer to be a front-end expert, but they have a little bit of knowledge, but they're also on a team with that person. So they're not another team relating to another team. It's all being done within this stack. And so they get that knowledge that sort of just bubbles up and down that no one's going to be an expert. But then what happens is you get this sort of in-stack, as I like to say, in-stack consulting going on, where, in the true DevOps or DevSecOps model, what you're trying to do from an issues and a security and operations perspective is when you have control failures or issues or tickets or whatever you want to call them, they go right to the teams that were responsible for creating the problem in the first place. But then the teams is the problem. So if it's a security issue and it comes into that application team that failed that control to get that code to the next level, they're going to know the context of the problem they're working on. They're going to know who created the problem. But then the team works together. And from a security perspective, what we see security people being the team that's just buried in alerts all the time to being freed up. And I think we talked about this earlier. They take on the role as a consultant now, right? It's on their team, it's in their stack, whatever you want to call it, and they help the team solve the problem. And what I found over the years is it was a great way to solve problems, but what I found is that the teams that really engaged that well, they became very, very, very knowledgeable, and in my world, say in security. So the application developers or the DevOps people or whomever became very knowledgeable about why we're doing this, the problems that they create, how to solve the problems. And it was sort of this internal feedback loop. And, we're all technology people. We all want to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty and figure it out. And what you came out with was that these teams were a lot more agile. They created less problems. And from a security space, they created a lot less security problems. So it was this whole sort of internal learning that went on. And I think that's something that Zach hit on in the DevOps was huge these days.
Yeah, so Jana, you can get a very false sense of security by saying, I'm going to have 1,000 developers coding away, and they're going to go to a toll gate with 4, 5, 10 people within a security team, and they're going to understand your code and review every line of code and understand, right? But they're giving you a
Yeah,
check
sure.
mark, so great, you have that check mark, awesome, you're secure, versus those 1,000 people kind of looking at their own code and then feeling responsible and having the freedom scale. And maybe the 5 or 10 people are giving a higher level overview from an expert perspective and guiding you as a coach and working with you. So it's really a pull versus a push down to say, I'm going to tell you what you need to do versus, hey, are we doing this okay? Do you have any additional thoughts on how we could do this better? Again, it goes back to the culture and the culture that you're establishing. And what is the outcome? The outcome would be that we want to parallelize all of this effort so that we can have the speed and agility, but put in some of those guardrails in the engagement process so that we actually have a much better outcome.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Zach, on the culture, because you need people that when someone finds a mistake, say, thank you for looking so intently at my code that you found a mistake. I actually had that happen with one of my colleagues. Had made a mistake and he found it, and it meant a weekend of intense work for me because it was a really inconvenient time to find the mistake. But I'd much rather find the mistake now than after the results of the research study had been released. But you have to build a culture where the reaction to that is not cover it up, don't tell anyone, pretend it didn't happen, but it's got to be like, yay, you found a mistake, thank God it happened now as opposed to before it was released.
That's right.
Okay, there is a question up, but before I go to the blockchain question, and I direct everyone's attention to reading that question, every panelist to read that question, I just wanted to ask, have we beaten to death enough the application versus infrastructure convergence discussion, or is there more that people want to say? And opening up to everyone, so whoever jumps in first will get this. Okay, I'm going to go with we beat it to death. Audience, if you have any additional questions about application and infrastructure convergence, please post them. Meanwhile, we will turn to the question of how is blockchain technology evolving in financial services? Can it be adopted in a pilot project, and what are the use cases? Okay, gentlemen, who wants to take this?
I'll take a first crack at that one because I'm very passionate about this technology. So I think, first of all, the number one blockchain implementation in the industry, non-crypto, I think everybody knows is JP Morgan's Onyx Link application, right? I think everybody's familiar with that. They just renamed it from the IIN network that was announced in 2017. Now they're renaming it Onyx Link, and there was a great article in CNBC and CoinDesk talking about that rebranding and the creation of this new business unit to really enable fintechs and banks to get on board with this blockchain application, and we're very close to it here at Nutanix. So I just think that whether you look at this as complementary to Swift, or you look at this as the next generation of industry utilities as peer-to-peer, ultimately this technology does have the opportunity to take down transaction costs and move away from hub and spoke utilities to peer-to-peer utilities. And there's just a lot of use cases. And also the use case around secure ID used in central banks. Central Bank of Azerbaijan, I know, has done that. Market
kind of a bad example at the moment, but yeah.
Well, yeah, check out Central Bank of Azerbaijan when you sort of have nothing else to do. But their central bank is gravitated to this. So this technology is in production. There are 400 banks using JP Morgan's Link application. It's just, I just think that it is in production. It is coming on strong. I just think we just have really, really struggled as an industry to sort of, where do we spin this up in our organization? Where does it sit in our institution? How do we look at it? And then how do we start taking advantage of the use cases? And I think the best place we can look right now is JP Morgan.
Anyone else? Because I have thoughts, but I want to open it up to my panel first.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when we talked about how change and people resist change. I think this is one of these classic areas where we have something that's exciting, something that's new, that's something that can really fundamentally change the way that we do things. But we're also talking about in industries that have been around for a really, really long time and have their really entrenched ways of how things done and paradigms of how they do this. So I think that, if we look at it from that level, I think this is an exciting technology, and Kevin mentions a lot of great tangible examples of it. But this is where, again, like to Zach says, culture comes in, right? This is something that is going to disrupt eventually. I think the people or the organizations that get on board with that early are really going to do well with that. So how do you engage the culture, create this culture around this or cloud or any other technology that's disrupting to say, we feel this is good for us. We want you to be a part of this, and let's make that happen. And I think that's how you'll see this successful.
I'm going to come back to the culture issue, but the question really asked for specific use cases. Yeah. I'll toss out one which is not specific to financial services, but will directly affect them, which is biopassports. In other words, remember that COVID-19 is the beginning. It's not the end. It's not like we're going to fix COVID-19 and never have to deal with pandemics again. We're going to get wave after wave of pandemics, and they're all going to be, they're all going to require intense focus. One of the things that will become incredibly important is to be able to say accurately whether Jana was exposed to whatever it was or was in a location where other people were exposed to it, and then choose to take decisions on that based on the level of exposure. But for that, you need an absolutely entirely authenticated passport that Jana can't hack so that she gets to go places she shouldn't be going. And that's that I expect we'll see fairly soon the financial services firms use for their buildings passports. So anyone else with use cases for blockchain?
Yeah, certainly as a secure file share. So if you want to share files very, very securely, and you want to make sure that any of the data is not going to be tampered with. So we actually have that up and running internally as a place. So if you have data that is sensitive, highly secure, and you want to have high security with it, and you want to have the provenance that no one has actually changed it at all. And it could be in a location that maybe you don't have full control over it, right? From a region of the world, maybe that it's possible that somebody tamper with it. Then it's a great use case for us. We are geographically distributed all over the world, and for us to be able to tap into something like that internally we can deploy and manage, and then be comfortable that it's a very secure way is a great use case for us.
Great. So we've got secure file share, SWIFT or other transaction network replacement, and biopassports. We gave you 3 use cases. Hope that answered your question. Okay, folks, surprisingly, we are coming into the end stretch of this. I know we had prepped on a whole lot more questions. But what I'd like to do now is really ask everyone, since this is innovation as well as application and infrastructure, I'm going to ask each person and give you about 90 seconds to answer, and I will time you. I'd like to know what major innovation will have a major impact within the next 3 to 5 years, and then what single thing should attendees do differently today to prepare for your innovation? And the only catch is you can't use an innovation that anyone else picked. So Ravi, you've been quiet, so I'm going to let you go first, because that gives you the full field, and I'll talk for a little bit to let you collect your thoughts. Although it was in the prep sheet, just letting everyone know. So Ravi goes first, and then I'll call each of you out by name. So Ravi, again, what major innovation will have a major impact within the next 3 to 5 years or sooner, but it's just something that's not having an impact today? And what single thing should attendees do differently to prepare for the innovation? And 90 seconds, go.
Sure. I think AI is still not mainstream if you think about it. Like, there are a lot of users who don't have access to it, right? So if you think about all the users, they don't write code, so they wouldn't be able to build models and things like that. So I think automation in AI model building would be like something that industry will focus on in next 3 to 5 years. And what that will do is enable the technology to all broader sets of non-technical audiences, right? And I think one thing that leaders should do is focus on encouraging everyone in the organization to learn AI and think about their AI journey. Because if not today, like 2, 3 years later, everybody has to kind of understand the concept and be able to build something, right? Because everyone has access to separate sets of data, but currently they just cannot build if they cannot code. So that's going to change in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so Ravi's answers are big innovation is AI, big change is everyone learns AI. So I've got the Wang Chung song going through my head now. Um, okay, Zach, you're up next. What is innovation and big thing everyone should do?
You've asked me not to talk
Steal
about
it.
AI ML, and then that's really tripping me up, and I'm scratching my head what else to talk about, because that's something that I've been spending a lot of time on. I think modularization, and what is happening in terms of DevOps with a lot of essentially building things modularly, the low code development, and then taking something like AI ML and what's happening in data science are really starting to converge together. So there's been a slow start on things like neuromorphic chips, that has a bit of an angle coming in. But I do think that really, when you look at AI, ML, and that starts to get democratized, where anybody, without really having to go deep into how it all works, is able to start to apply within the environment, essentially becomes really, really easy for engineers to be able to put it against applications, then that will start to accelerate the pace of the innovation. We're already starting to see it, right? So when we say that we're going to
Okay,
have DevOps.
you've got 30 seconds to give us what people should do. Just letting you know. What
Absolutely.
should people do
So
to
when you
prepare
look
for
at
it?
things that are happening in DevOps, it is going to become much, much easier for you to be able to do this. So similar to what Ravi said, ML, start to look at use cases, start to understand what it means, see how the applications within the engineering side of it are starting to envelop. And this is a very fast moving things. It may seem incredibly hard in the beginning, but starting to get a lot easier for you to understand.
Okay, so look at use cases. So basically, the convergence of modularization, low code, and the democratization of AI and ML, and start looking at use cases as your big change.
That's right.
Eric, you cannot use AI ML, sorry, in any capacity. Anything but that.
I mean, I think a major innovation will have an impact over the next 3 to 5 years is like, the clouds are here to stay, whether it be public cloud or hybrid cloud or multi-cloud. And, for me, it's the security tooling, and specifically in the identity and data governance space, right? You need to be able to ask yourself from an identity perspective, what are my identities and what can they truly do, not just in one cloud, but maybe across all of my clouds. And then you need to be able to flip the coin and say, where is all my data across all of this? Things happen quickly, and you have to be able to answer those questions. Where is my data? What is my data? And more importantly, who has access to it? So, I mean, what should organizations do? I think they need to start thinking about the new paradigms that are out there in the cloud. Identity as the new perimeter is one of them. I think they need to start asking themselves the basic questions. Where is my data across these clouds? And who is accessing this stuff? And how do I know if they're doing it? And how do I know where that data is moving? And I think that anybody that fails to do that today is going to put themselves in a really tough position very quickly.
So the innovation would be effective multi-cloud identity and data governance that we don't have today?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and then the action is think of new paradigms with the notion of identity as the new perimeter.
That's correct.
Okay, Kevin, what is your new innovation, something we don't have today, and you know what it can't be? And then the thing people should do differently.
Yeah, I think number one is, I think you're going to see financial services define cloud-first strategy as hybrid multi-cloud. And I think you're going to see greater cooperation.
They're not doing that today? That's the question.
No,
is there not?
Okay. Cloud-first strategy, generally, if you ask somebody what cloud-first strategy is today, they'll tell you it's public cloud. We're moving workloads to public cloud. Oh, and you'll ask them what cloud, and they'll say one or more. And so what I think we're going to see now is sort of a more holistic view of cloud adoption, as cloud-first strategy is hybrid multi-cloud with a fully integrated ecosystem between the private cloud providers and the three big public cloud providers. That's number one. So I think understanding that. For number two is, how are AWS, Azure, and GCP going to evolve to add more value?
Number two is, what should people do what should our attendees do to take advantage of this innovation?
I think AWS, Azure, and GCP are going to evolve to become more we're going to be financial services is going to be driving more of their implementation. And so financial services institutions need to preserve control. I think when they need to now think about, how do I control this? How do I manage it so that I'm in control? And if I'm taking liability, how can I enforce that liability as a shared liability with my providers?
So basically, innovation number one is redefine cloud first as hybrid multi-cloud, and action, the big change is begin to take a proactive role in driving the providers to regain control.
Correct. To actually enforce the cooperation that this industry needs on both on those providers as an ecosystem supporting our industry, not the other way around. Them enforcing, their cloud on us.
Great. And Glenn, you are last but far from least, the big innovation that you think is going to hit in the next couple of years and what people should do to prepare for it.
Yeah, luckily the one I had in mind wasn't mentioned, so that's good. The one I wanted to call out was actually rethinking Java. So if you look at, this is a little specific on the app side, but from a Java perspective, we always look at the JVM, and that's how traditionally we've developed Java apps. Now, it's already something that exists, but it's growing rapidly as native Java. So the concept here is disposing of the JVM for Java. And it's actually a much more cloud native approach to developing Java applications. So I'm sure many of us have a large Java footprint or of applications that we do in Java today. The benefits here is, looking at this as an innovation, the footprint, the startup time, the speed of development rapidly changes. So I think something that we're excited about and been doing some POCs on already. The example out there is called Quarkus, which is one of the frameworks that enables this that people can check out. So in terms of what people should do, I would say go and look at that and think about generally what kind of runtimes and application programming approach you can take that makes you ready for the other innovations the team here talked about, whether it's cloud native or other pieces. So yeah, that's mine.
And what was the name of the thing that people should check out?
Yeah, so one of the examples, Quarkus. There's also a couple of Micronaut and some other examples, but it's native Java. If you look that up, that's the technology there. Yeah.
Okay, great. So big innovation is native Java, and thing to do is to go check out the tools that allow you to implement it.
Yeah, and try
guys,
something real. Try and actually build something real versus just reading about it. I think that's always how engineers really learn, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. You never really stress test something until you build it to use it. So, well, gentlemen, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've been taking